what should I look for in a social media marketer? I'm like, get a 24-year-old who is a really good communicator and is on social media all the time. And those are the best social media hires I've ever had because they're the most
Absolutely.
creative, they understand the channels really well, and then pair them with someone who really understands the business strategy and the positioning of the brand and has a clearly defined brand. And that marriage is what you want.
So, Kim, you're the first CMO that we have on our podcast.
What an
So
honor.
very, this is very special for us. And also very special for me because you worked in education, which is also where I spent early career of my, and the other thing that we do on Women Who Build is literally educate young people on business and technology. So that makes the podcast extra special. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Kim, why don't you walk us through your journey so far and what you've been up to lately?
Great. Yeah. So I'm a career marketer. I studied sociology and psychology in college and just love the idea of understanding people and what makes them tick. And then getting into the business world, thinking about how companies can build products and services that really cater to the needs of those individuals and hopefully make the world a better place. So I started largely in brand consulting, really honing the understanding of how to think about different market segments, consumer segments, their needs, and then how to build the products and services and experiences that ladder up to those needs and deliver those promises. Went back to business school at Stanford, got the startup bug, went through the motion of starting a marketing consultancy for startups, decided I didn't want to run my own business, but wanted to use that marketing skill set to help other businesses and startups that were trying to grow. Spent some early time in Apple doing iPhone app marketing in the early app days, which were definitely changing the way people live their lives. Went to Facebook for 5 years, where I did a kind of jungle gym model of marketing through B2B and product marketing and mobile marketing and brand marketing and performance marketing, establishing a lot of those marketing functions, and then joined Coursera, where I was for 8 years, 5 of which I was there as the CMO. I joined at a kind of Series B. There were 5 of us on the marketing team. It was just getting established to lead brand and product marketing. And then a couple of years in, evolved into the chief marketing officer role where I was for the last 5. And I left about 2 years after IPO, over 500 million in revenue and a marketing team of around 300. So it was an amazing kind of growth journey. And I left about a year and a half ago. I have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And my vision has been to get to a point where I can work, more like 20 to 30 hours a week, have a little bit more of that family balance, but still work with companies that are scaling. And so now I spend my time about half in ed tech and half in health tech, working with a variety of companies to help them from kind of series or seed all the way through Series C, in that growth journey, and helping them kind of hone their product market fit and their positioning and their go-to-market engine, to hopefully grow and achieve their mission.
That's pretty exciting. And let's start with your work at Coursera. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that you started at Coursera when it had just raised its Series B and you saw it through the IPO. So how did your priorities change as a marketing leader from Series B to IPO and then beyond? Because you also spent
Yeah.
like a couple of years after IPO. And if you could just focus on 3 things, metrics, team, and branding, how did those 3 things really change?
In the early phase, it was a lot about just establishing what marketing could be for the business, which I think is common. It's one of the kind of least understood functions, I think, often by founders and early teams. And so there's usually a concept of we should have marketing, but what do we really hold marketing accountable to? And so it was great because we could come in and say, okay, there's, a pricing change happening. Well, you need product marketing to help with that. How are we going to roll this out? What's the value to consumers? How do we articulate this in a way that's going to bring people more on board and willing to pay as opposed to upset with us?
Right.
And so building that out, or, now we're having a big partners conference, and our university partners were the key to a lot of our business. And how do we actually think about a longer term relationship with them, and how we could use marketing in the sense of partner marketing to really provide more value to our partners, up level what we were doing in our events, and have more of an ongoing close relationship with them from a marketing perspective. Or, how are we building out our acquisition channels? So like getting paid media up and running, getting an SEO strategy up and running. And so I had a counterpart doing a lot of that in the early days. So in the beginning, it's a lot about what is the business challenge that the organization is facing next, and then bringing that marketing skill set to bear to help with it. So, certainly performance marketing is always going to have clear metrics in terms of, we can continue to invest in this if we hit this kind of ROI. And so you're shooting for something much more concrete. On the other aspects of marketing, like product marketing or brand marketing, a lot of times it's a lot more subjective in terms of, if you do it well, longer term, you're going to have more people coming to you, more word of mouth, better product market fit, better retention, better utilization. But those are obviously a mix of not just marketing, but also product and customer service and a lot of other things as well. So I think it's really in the early stage, just how do we add value and show the role that marketing can play in supporting these business goals. And I actually honestly take that approach to later stage companies too, which is, there's no one size fits all marketing strategy. Marketing is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And so it's really, what are the top, the planning cycle we went through is, what are the top 4 business metrics for the business overall? And therefore, what are the top 4 marketing metrics that we're going to hit that are going to help the company reach those 4 business metrics? And so depending on where the company is will really determine these are the parts of the Swiss Army knife we're going to deploy over the next year or two. And it's really tied to that.
You also talked about ROI, which is very interesting, and people often get confused as to what should be the duration, right, that we should measure ROI for. So does it change stage by stage, or because I think like in early stages, it's very important for you to really understand or be very efficient as to where you want to put your time and energy in, and therefore what should be the duration, or there's no set duration?
Yes, great question. So there's a couple different ways to think about this. There's a tops down model to thinking about this. And so if I'm talking to a CEO, some of the first questions I'll ask are, what is sales and marketing as a percent of your revenue today? And what is your LTV to CAC? And when I talk about LTV, it's like based on your expected and reasonable to assume customer value. So if you've been around longer, you have some real data on that. If you don't, you need to put something in the sand of what your estimated lifetime value is going to be, and then look at your estimated costs. And there's also a art to kind of what is the lag on that, right? So for a higher consideration product, you might spend money in these 6 months to make money 6 months from now. And so you want to factor all of those things in. But in general, you need to look at the industry that you're building in and make sure that you're building a system that is going to have strong sales and marketing as a percent of revenue when you compare it to the kind of competitors in your space that are bigger, larger companies. And also make sure that you have an LTV to CAC that is going to similarly position you well for sustainable growth, because that's what investors at various stages are going to look at. So that's the first thing I start with from a top-down perspective. And then from a bottom-up perspective, you might be specifically saying, how much should I spend in paid, right? And so for something like that, you do need to give yourself, a couple months to test into getting to what you think a reasonable, efficient baseline is, because you're going to start out a little bit higher. But you want to give yourself a couple months to experiment with a relatively low budget. And then ultimately, I think you want to be shooting for paid that's, a 1.5 to 2x at least return on ad spend. So for Coursera, for example, our best performing paid channels were, 5x return on ad spend. And then we kind of had a baseline of things that were going to grow had to be over 2 return on ad spend, or 2x return on ad spend. And then if we were experimenting with an emerging channel, then we were just trying to get to break even to see if there was room to continue to grow and iterate to bring that to a higher percentage payback, if that makes sense.
So you were at Facebook before you joined Coursera, and at both companies you saw and practice scale. There was also a point in time where you grew the number of learners at Coursera from 9 million to 31 million within a year. Am I right?
Yes.
So what have you learned about building
The pandemic had pretty crazy growth as well. That one was earlier.
Well, that is one of the learnings as well, right? Like how
Yeah.
can, something like a pandemic help you
Right.
scale? So what have you really learned about building robust systems for scale?
We will often hear me say is I think it all comes back to core growth strategy and then product market fit within that. So we used to talk at Coursera about, it's both science and luck, right? So you need to have put yourself in the right position to have the right things in place, but then there's also luck in terms of, what are the tailwinds in the world that are happening today, or what are the headwinds in the world, and have you done a good job thinking through and positioning yourself in the best place for any scenario. And so I think the way I like to think about it first is what is our really clear growth strategy? So where is there a large enough market with a large TAM where there's a lot of growth happening, right? You don't want to go into a large but dying industry.
Right.
A large industry where a lot of growth is happening that you're uniquely positioned to be successful, right? And so that's kind of what I think about as really having a very clear growth strategy. And then secondly, then once you have that, really using the product market fit process to make sure that you're that third bucket of, are you uniquely positioned to win? Are you really setting up yourself up for success? And that's where being really clear about what we call the 6 Ps, right? Lean product playbook, but knowing your persona that you're going after, knowing what their problems and pain points are, knowing what your product position is in your product, and really nailing the positioning to that audience. So while we're not the question was about growth, and a lot of people go to growth channels. To me, that's all like the afterthought. So I think the core is like, are you in the right market? Are you well positioned to win? And if so, then those growth channels are going to work for you, and you're going to have organic growth, and that entire growth engine will have the opportunity to take off. But I think a lot of times people will set up channels, but they don't actually have the right buyer, product market fit, positioning. And so they were set up to fail, and so I think really iterate, if you get that product market fit and positioning really right, then everything else is going to work for your business to grow.
Basically setting the fundamentals right and then focusing on the others.
Yeah.
And then, so you also talked about, the fact that you're helping startups, right, at this point. So how do you distribute your time? You're also working with Bessemer, then you have your personal consulting stuff. So if you could just walk us through that, and then we have a few questions around your work there.
So there's a mix. The companies that I work most directly with and over longer periods of time, typically it's a CEO who is just setting up their marketing function and is looking to establish, what should our marketing strategy be? Who should I hire to these roles? How should I think about budgeting and resourcing for it? So I'll work with them. Very similar to the process that I just talked about. It's really like, what are the business metrics you need to hit? Therefore, what are the most likely what are the contributions from a marketing metric perspective that you need to do to hit those? Now that we have those marketing metrics, what are the biggest growth bets or marketing levers we have to pull to drive each of those metrics? And therefore, what functional areas, skill sets, channels, et cetera, should we invest in order to grow that? And obviously starting from a start small, test it, and then scale once you get it right perspective. That's the most common way that I work with companies early on. And I also just have lots of, one-off conversations with different founders and heads of marketing on their strategy as well. And then I also do some with kind of emerging marketing leaders or CROs who are leading marketing to help kind of coach them in those similar areas.
And so if, there is a company or someone who's listening to this podcast wants to start a company, obviously in very, very early stages, so pre-seed and seed, and has no context, has no marketing context, should they hire a generalist or someone in the marketing domain at all, or should they try to, educate themselves on marketing, and do whatever they can, to make sure that it works?
Yeah. So I think obviously the first step is getting to an initial phase of product market fit, right? So doing a lot of independent customer discovery, making sure you have a really clear case for, yeah, I've talked to, 100 people in this domain, they need this product. And I have a sense for how I build it. But once you have that, I think bringing in someone with kind of that product marketing or positioning experience to then help you really nail that down, crystallize it, make sure it's, because a lot of times it's initially founder-led sales, right? And how do you make that transition from a founder-led sale to, oh, we need to generate demand, or we need to hire salespeople and equip them to tell our story. So as soon as you get past that founder-led sales phase, I think it's important to have a marketer who can help really make sure that you have articulated what is in your head as a founder, in a way that will scale across your website and your sales hires and your email communications and all of that. So I probably would start with kind of a product marketing, brand marketing, mid-level employee who is able to help you translate that. And then, there are also lots of great contract agency resources in marketing. And so making sure you're hiring the right resources is definitely helpful. But there are a lot of opportunities to hire part-time or use an agency and test some of those things before you invest in full-time. And there are lots of people like me, right, who are more senior marketers who do fractional work and things like that, which I think can be a great way to have someone help make sure you're hiring the right resources, setting the right metrics and accountability for them, setting the right budget for them, and things like that.
It's very exciting that you talk about different resources, the availability of different resources. And while, we think about resources as being, an agency, someone like you who's more strategic and who gives that guidance, and then like a full-fledged marketing team. And I often think about, okay, focusing on unit economics, focusing on how to make sure that you're more efficient with your time and money. And there's this topic of, outsourcing it to another country always comes to my mind, just from a cost savings perspective. And I don't know if you're seeing something similar in, the startups that you work with, that, they maybe hire someone from Indonesia who's a great marketer, who's understands consumers. Are you seeing something of that sort as well?
I have a lot more of those conversations in the scaling phase. And then there are definitely some more executional resources that I think you can do that with earlier. But I think in the early phases, you're learning so much and you want to have really close. So obviously, if your customer is in another country, having someone on the ground that's close to the customer is a huge asset. So in those cases, definitely I would suggest looking at marketers who are in market in region. But if it's more of, if you're a domestic US based company, I would hire like early, more closer to that market, people who know that market, who are well connected in that market, because you're going to be continuing to kind of hone that product market fit. And then when you get into things like scaling, we had a lot of our marketing resources growing in India, and we had people in Colombia, and a lot of different locations for, especially like if you're doing a lot of telesales, or if you're doing kind of high scale automated outreach, if you're doing a lot of paid, even a lot of creative services, there's like great resources and agencies that are internationally based as well in lower cost locations. But I think a lot of that comes to fruition more when you're in scaling phase, not as much when you're in nailing phase.
Interesting. You also talk about PMF quite a lot. How do we know that we've achieved PMF? And if not, then how do we detach from it, from product?
Yeah. My favorite phrase is PMF is a journey, not a destination, right? So like a lot of times looking at the phone, an investor say, oh, they're post product market fit. And I'm like, okay, maybe phase one of product market fit. But, for a reference point, even Coursera as a public company, we'd be going through like 6 to 8 product market fit sprints a quarter, right? Because there's a constant question of what is our next growth vehicle. And so there's always a next phase of product market fit. So I think it is a very much a journey. The metrics, if you have product market fit, are you growing and are you retaining your customers, right? And so if you have great growth potential in what you're doing and those people are retaining and expanding, keep doing what you're doing. Like that'll be an easier way to grow. But inevitably you start to see in the numbers like, oh, our growth is slowing, or we have less untapped TAM here, or the next phase of customers is going to be much harder to get to, or we have a certain type of customer that is churning, or our deal size is getting smaller, or, all these questions come up as you are running your business. And so any of those questions where one of your business metrics isn't looking the way you want it to is the signal to like go back to the PMF drawing board, right? Like understand why that's happening, understand what you need to tweak, if the persona needs to change, if the offering needs to change, if the pricing needs to change, if the positioning needs to change, right? So those are the signals to go back. And like you said, I think the question ultimately with any investment is there enough of a clear opportunity where it makes sense to continue to invest in this area compared to whatever other opportunity might be in front of us, right? Like looking at things as not in isolation, but looking at kind of what is the full scope of our investment and growth opportunities, and which ones do we have the biggest payoff with the biggest likelihood of success. And you can use product market fit processes and interviews to help you assess the likelihood of success as well, and how confident you should be in those bets. But certainly you should always be optimizing for, what's the next biggest opportunity we can invest into that has the biggest growth potential and the highest likelihood of payoff.
And when you talk about customer surveys and, those interviews, obviously when a company starts, there is a core set of customers that you have, they could be your family and friends or whoever. But then it obviously evolves as a company grows, and so does the PMF. How do you stay connected to the set, right? That's like the hardest thing. Even like with my podcast, I've sort of experienced that. So how do you do that?
Yeah. So I always like to start with understanding your current audience. So knowing there's this crossing the chasm problem, there's going to be a wider world. Like most importantly, make sure you know and can speak the language of what draws people to you today, right? Because that is your secret sauce and you don't want to lose that. And then thinking about kind of the next audience, right? Like going to those prospects, and it's a little different if you're B2B or B2C, right? So I work across both B2B and B2C. If you're B2B, it's largely customer interviews. If it's B2C, it's likely a potential consumer survey. And really understanding, testing your hypotheses about who those buyers are, what their needs are, how much they're willing to spend for different services, and then testing the value props that you have from your existing customers, understanding if those are the same things those prospects care about, or if there's actually different things, or if they would rank them differently. So you start to get a picture of like, okay, this worked for today, but or for our current customers. And then building from that, do we need to change the feature set? Do we need to change the pricing model? Do we need to change the way we're talking about ourselves or positioning ourselves in order to fit into this next buyer's opportunity? And doing that among potential customers and not your current customers, but your ICP or your target customer profile is what you want to do from there.
And while, doing all of this may be easier for B2B, is my guess, I may be wrong, but B2B, because they are literally your clients. B2C may be harder because like you don't know what the LTV of that customer is, if the customer will actually respond to you, people don't have the time. And so is there a secret sauce or a communication channel that you can use to get to those customers faster versus, or you can get them to respond, is there a way for you to do that?
Yeah, for prospects and consumer, you usually have to give them some sort of incentive. And they're just like every other industry, the market research industry is getting disrupted with, all kinds of different AI tooling and things like that as well. So, but I would still go. There are some new companies in that space that are taking creative ways to use AI to get faster customer responses, or even theoretical customer responses, depending on what you're talking about. But in general, I think you do need to decide to invest in a survey like that. So I think it's important when you're like, okay, we feel like we have achieved a lot of growth, but we need to understand, like we're kind of hitting a bit of where our growth is slowing, right? And we need to understand what's going to get us to that next hurdle. I think it is worth investing in a research survey of your potential consumers to really save a lot of time and investment in making sure that you're going the right direction before you take that on.
I think a very interesting aspect of your career is your work today. And I say this because so many of my friends are in this transition phase. Whenever I talk to them, they're like, oh, we're transitioning out or we're transitioning into something, right? So, I mean, how did you plan your startup consulting initiative given where you are, both personally and professionally? I know you talked about it a little bit in your introduction as well, but if you could just like do a deep dive into the factors you considered and how are you feeling psychologically? What made you ready?
I mean, look, the grass is always greener. There's always pros and cons to everything. I like to, from when I had my first child, my approach has always been like, look at things from a couple months at a time, right? Like I think there's a lot of pressure early on when you have a child of like a binary decision of am I a working mom or a stay-at-home mom or a part-time mom or whatever. And it's like, those are all, now all of my friends have gone through many different phases of like working part-time, not working. And so just thinking about it as like a long journey that you make decisions about a couple months at a time is my best advice. And it's an experiment just like anything else. So I knew I wanted to scale back my hours. I had that in my head ever since business school before I had kids. I didn't know what form that would take. And I was very fortunate to end up having the journey I did at Coursera. So I had my dream job and that gave me a platform to transition into consulting and part-time, but still at a very senior strategic level. Originally, I thought I would be more doing like project-based consulting and that would be fine as well. But this has been a real great opportunity. And then I think just same way as getting a job, but it's kind of an ongoing basis. It's just, networking, putting yourself out there, letting people know what you're doing. And so, a lot of my clients now come through VC connections that I have. I think being an expert in a particular space, so certainly having deep experience in ed tech has made it much easier to like go out to the world of ed tech companies. And it's a fairly kind of concentrated industry. And then from there, I have the opportunity to branch out more. But I think it's your own product market fit process, right? So like really honing and understanding and doing interviews with people to understand, what are the needs that are out there? What are the unique experiences from a skill, from an industry perspective that I bring to bear? And then packaging that up in a really clear way and making sure that everyone in your network knows about that. And it's a lot of like, I'll talk to pretty much anyone who is referred to me for an initial free conversation, right? And those are really fun, and a small portion of those convert. So it's really just thinking about yourself as the product you're marketing.
Oh, absolutely. This is great. And do you also keep a track? Like, do you have Excel where you have like 500 or 50 people spoken to? Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, I do. It's a Google sheet. It's not very sophisticated, but it works. And I keep a record of the companies that I've talked to and who introduced me to them and highlight the ones where I think there's more of a clear product market fit potential, things like that.
Love that. And it's also very interesting where you say that, you need to understand or be an expert in something because then that gets people excited about you, your profile.
Yeah, people in business have needs they need to solve. So just like customers, like they need to set up paid digital, they need to set up SEO, they need to figure out their marketing strategy, they need to hire a VP of marketing, right? Like they have specific needs. And so making sure that you position yourselves to one of those needs, I think is the key.
Right. And how do you sort of determine the size of the opportunity? Obviously it's for an individual, but still, how do you know that marketing for EdTech to begin with can be like I don't know, like your product, right? And then this is a sizable opportunity enough. Do you do that or is it not required?
I think that's been a bit more natural, and I intentionally definitely want to still work in ed tech, but also don't only want to work in ed tech. And so I think both like that is a helpful entry point, but I don't position myself generally as ed tech specific, right? So this is a skill set that translates across industries. My marketing expertise translates across B2B and B2C. And, if you think about marketing as kind of three pillars of product marketing, brand marketing, and growth marketing, here are the experiences that I have across all three of those, which is important at that kind of marketing strategy level. So I think you want it to be clear what value you bring and also be open and broad when you're working independently, because, companies that have the right timing and the right budget to be able to invest in these things, it's a little up and down. You don't quite know exactly who's going to be that perfect match when you start out.
So let's move on to your key takeaways as a CMO.
Yeah.
And this is for other CMOs who may be listening to this or who want to become CMOs, right?
Yeah.
So what are the key lessons that you've learned about the US customer, both consumers, individual consumers, and businesses? And where is the customer today versus where customer was, say, a few years ago when you just started at Coursera or even at Facebook?
I think it's a general trend, regardless of the market you're in, regardless of B2B or B2C, which is just there's so many marketing messages getting thrown at people today. And so the important thing is always thinking about how am I adding value to this person, right? Like it's not about just thinking about, I need to touch them 8 to 12 times. It's there are 100 people touching them 8 to 12 times, like hundreds probably. So what's the thing that is actually going to stop them in their tracks and be like, oh, I should know that about my business, or wow, I have that problem, and you're sharing a really interesting data point or tool or something that I can use in my day-to-day life to improve whatever goal I have that I'm trying to solve, right? And so I think the core is just being even more disciplined about specifically what value am I bringing, what tool am I providing, what information am I providing to help someone, with the problem that they have. How am I telling them something that they don't already know that's uniquely something I can tell them instead of what anyone else is telling them, and getting that in front of the consumer consistently. And so I think that's why you have so much opportunity with companies that do content marketing really well. And again, just like really being clear about their product market fit and their messaging and their value proposition and the proof points that they use and how they turn that into data driven insights for consumers or customers, I think is really the key.
And are you seeing younger customers, consumers of, the brands that you work with? Has the age bracket shifted a little bit?
It really depends on the company.
Consumer company, consumer brands.
Yeah. I work now for like preschools all the way through, adult health and wellness, or like senior care. So it's a full spectrum.
Yeah.
I think, again, it really just like there's opportunity across the board. It's just really knowing who you're selling to. And, sometimes I have interesting conversations because like the youth consumer today, there's just like, there is definitely a different way of communication and language and things like that. But I think even with that, I think there's a danger of just being like trendy for the sake of being trendy. I think much more important to come back to that value conversation. And no matter what age someone is, if you're telling them something that's actually going to add value to a problem they have, like that's what matters. That's what's going to build a long-term relationship with that person or not.
And it's also, being trendy and then, or maybe like giving value and then at the same time being trendy to not be uncool, because
you need to speak in a language that your consumer understands.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I also asked this because, for the podcast, of course, like I'm not on Instagram. I don't understand Instagram, but so I've been looking at people who could actually help me ramp up some of the Instagram, because I just don't understand it, but I can help figure out what the customer is feeling. So I specifically asked that because, that also talks to your team building to a great extent.
Yes, totally. But I just had this conversation with someone like, what should I look for in a social media marketer? I'm like, get a 24-year-old who is a really good communicator and is on social media all the time. And those are the best social media hires I've ever had because they're the most
Absolutely.
creative, they understand the channels really well, and then pair them with someone who really understands the business strategy and the positioning of the brand and has a clearly defined brand. And that marriage is what you want.
Absolutely, I agree. We've been putting out this. I just want anyone between 24 to 27 years old who can help me
Yeah.
understand, okay, what is it that the young folks really
Yeah.
want?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And then, you talked about AI, and so how will the use of AI really impact the future of marketing, and how will this really change as to how companies think about productivity and about unit economics, or maybe even team building, right? What have you seen so far?
Yeah, so I think the strategic elements of marketing across all functional areas of marketing, the strategy is still going to be really heavily influenced by the quality of the people in those roles. I think as you get to like scalability and efficiency of teams, there's just a lot that you can use AI for, right? So, you and what the work I do, a lot of times I'm working with brands on their core positioning and their messaging. And before I would have done the strategy and then I would have needed, a agency or a copywriter or something to help translate all that. And I can use Chat GPT for a lot of it, which is awesome. And similarly for creative development, like, at Coursera for a long time, our creative team was wonderful. And there was just way too much work for them to do across the marketing team. And so historically, where you would have had to rely on, a lot of kind of ad hoc things happening, there's a lot of tools that can help you reproduce on brand materials and collateral and all of that. When it comes to everything from SEO, being really smart about like what people are looking for, what articles you should be writing about, what keywords you should be optimizing for, generating initial drafts. There's so much there. Paid creative testing, right? Like you could create many more creative iterations on something to test much faster than you could before. So if you look at call-based business models, whether that's, SDRs and B2B or enrollment counselors and higher education on the consumer side or call centers, there's just portions of everything is getting automated and much more efficient. You still need someone to set the strategy, know how to optimize it, take that human touch to understand is what I'm real like what of these options of what's getting communicated are really expressing what I'm trying to communicate. So I think it'll just be a shift. Everyone needs to understand. Every job should take a pause, take a week, and say, if I had to use AI for everything I do, what would that look like, especially for larger teams?
Yeah.
That was an exercise we kind of went through at Coursera at one point in time, and it's really eye-opening. And I think it's very easy to do things the status quo way, but to actually take the time to take a step back and be like, how could I do my job function more efficiently with the use of AI? There's an opportunity in every area. And so I think just like forcing teams to take a step back and think about that and then adopt what really worked and obviously not what didn't. But I think that's a really worthwhile exercise.
And you talked about like maintaining creativity and just getting the first
Yeah.
draft as well, using AI. Have you found Chat GPT or anything else, right, to be a better creative writer versus not? Like Meta AI is also very impactful. Specifically, I say that because for me to really improve the SEO of my content that I post on social media,
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
use Meta AI, and I find that more impactful versus others.
Yeah.
But
Smart.
that's because like it's Meta.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you found something similar for your creatives as well.
I'm still experimenting and I think they're all changing so fast.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to try different things out. You can obviously, build GPTs too on your own. So I have like a
Yeah.
brand marketer GPT I use.
Oh.
Um, so I think it's changing so fast. So I don't know that there's like one clear use this yet. I think experimenting is great. And I think that use case that you just gave is an awesome one.
I think I was listening to one of your podcasts where you mentioned that there needs to be a balance in terms of like the energy, the team, and the capital that you put on, both your short-term and long-term marketing
Yeah.
project, right? So could you just like talk to us about it? Maybe, if you want to reference a project or
Yeah.
anything you want to do. I mean, would love to get that sense.
There's a lot of variables to this, right? So one is what stage company are you at, right? Are
Mm.
you at a high growth company? If so, you probably have more room to experiment. If are you at a stage where you're like really reining in EBITDA and like trying to
Right.
go for profitability, like all of a sudden you have maybe a year where you're less experimental. So you have to take the practicalities of where the business is in consideration. One of the things that I love that we did at Coursera was every spring we took a 3-year view of the business and we said, okay, if we want to have grown to this much in revenue in 3 years, what do we think is the most likely business model that has gotten us there? And then functionally, we had to back into, okay, so if that's where we are and this is how much we're really able to spend to get there, and these are the big bets for the business, then what's going to be most different about our functional area in 3 years? What are the bets we need to make to be more scalable? What are the things we need to prove out to see if they could actually be that big of a business? And so having that longer term view in the planning process. And then every fall we would come back and say, okay, what's our plan for next year, right? Like what are we committing to in our plan for revenue and what are the resources we're able to spend to get there? And therefore what bets are we making? So pairing some flavor of a longer term vision with the practicalities of what you need to achieve in the next year, I think is a really great way to make sure that you are doing the things that are going to drive revenue in the next year, but also keeping the 3-year view in mind to carve off, a couple areas where it's like, okay, this isn't going to be a revenue producer in year 1, but if we're going to get where we want to go in 3, we have to see if there's a there with this other idea. And so looking at kind of the time horizon of that, the efficiency of the core business compared to, it kind of sets you up for how much you're able to experiment with non-core, non-revenue producing areas today. From a pure like paid media perspective, in an ideal scenario, we typically would have, 80% of our media budget that was clearly ROI positive, and about 20% where we would test new experimental channels or new things we were going to do, because you need to kind of have those next things that you're developing for the next phase of growth. That's a lot easier to do in paid budgets, which tend to, scale and carve out some. So it really depends again on where you are, but that's how I think about it.
And can there be conflicts when you're making some of these decisions within the team? And if so, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so we would do that exercise at the executive level and we would all create our models and we would all like argue over this or that. And then we would come together and ultimately, our CEO would decide this is the model we're going with. Everyone has heard everyone's like arguments and pros and cons and risks and upsides, and you capture all those things with whatever the model is. But it was a great way to build commitment and a shared sense of we're in this together. We understand the priorities. The other simple thing that we did from our CEO that I think was really effective was we had stack ranked OKRs at the company level,
Right.
in order of priority with one person's name on each one, right? And so while a lot of those things are cross-functional efforts, okay, so this person's thing is the number one thing. So I need to make sure that my team is doing what we need to do to contribute to that thing. And then, my thing might be number 3. And I know that I have the support of the other cross-functional executive team members to drive that thing in order of priority number 3. And then you can have much more specific conversations or debates about, okay, how do we shift this resource to here if
Right.
that was the consequence, but everyone has the same sense of priority top down of like, this is the order of priority and who owns what, and we're going to support each other in getting that done.
Interesting. Kim, where is EdTech today? And I ask this because, so as part of the fund that I helped build, we, were fortunate to invest in an academy in India. And we've seen a few other content companies in India as well.
Yeah.
Similarly for you, Coursera, but we always I think our metric was always that or rather like our thesis was that we will only invest in companies that help improve learning outcome for
Yes.
whatever kind of audience it was helping. So, but then I think that there has been a slowdown in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
How are you viewing it, and what are the kind of companies that you are excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think at the macro level, there's still a lot of problems to be solved.
Yeah.
And so like, I think there is still a lot of opportunity to both have an impact and financial gain. Ed tech is both. I think, the worthy areas are harder to change, right? Like,
I agree.
I don't think health tech is that different. Sustainability, like all these areas, right?
Yeah,
You have to have the heart for it and a long-term perspective. So I think there has been a ton of innovation. I think there have been companies that have captured a lot of value. In general, it's not a great market for it right now, but there still is a lot of investment and commitment in this space. And a lot of problems to be solved. So ed tech works on a longer cycle. You have these academic years. It takes a long time to get programs up and running. There's a lot of seasonality and just time lag from the time you recruit a student to the time you capture the revenue from that student. So it's a longer time horizon business to be in, an industry to be in, but I think there's still a lot of commitment to it, both financially and entrepreneurship wise, and a lot of opportunity in terms of problems to solve.
absolutely. So you are a daughter of two coaches.
Yes.
Tell us more about it and how do you think it helped shape you as to who you are today and even growing up, right? What did it feel like?
Yeah. So my parents were both tennis coaches at Stanford. My dad coached the men's team for 36 years, and my mom coached the women's team for 5, and then taught the tennis PE classes at Stanford. They both have won national championships in their respective
Wow.
areas of tennis. And I think like that definitely did have a huge influence on me. I grew up around sports my whole life. I think the two biggest lessons are just one, like how to compete, how to have a growth mindset. It's always about just get a little bit better every day. Always have something you're working on improving. Like feedback is a gift. You have to, continue to hone your craft. And then I think the second piece is the importance of team. I played volleyball growing up and in college, and so I gravitated towards team sports a lot. But just you can only be as strong as your weakest link, right? And so in a team sport, and I worked with a great management coach the last couple of years at Coursera that helped me connect that team mentality into my business setting and my team, and like really thinking about how a lot of times in business you can think very hierarchical of like this person's my manager and I manage this person, and really think up and down as opposed to think across. But I think that when it's a lot more fun and you achieve a lot more is when you think of yourself as a team of peers, and knowing like I'm only going to be as successful as my peer doing, customer operations or product is going to be, and how can we work together and leverage our strengths to create something that's better than any one of those. And I love that orientation. That's the kind of team I want to be part of. And so I think that has really shaped the way that I like to think about team building as well. And hopefully getting out of that concept of like cutthroat, I win, you lose, like,
Yeah.
Sense of fixed gain, and much more like we can rise all, rising tide lift all boats, So that's how I like to think about it.
And how do you keep reminding your peers of, your mentality and make sure that the entire team actually works like that? Because I mean, I'm guessing that just one individual having that
Yeah.
mindset does not work. It has to be the team collectively. So how did you do?
I think it starts with the culture that you set with whatever level you're in, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely how I ran the marketing function. And our CEO had a similar orientation in terms of how he thought about team and in the way that he planned, right? Like I mentioned, we would all go through that process together. We would all have to kind of make the same commitments.
Yeah.
And so I think it really starts at that level, right? So you can more easily cascade it down, and then I think also people around you see what you're doing with your team, and you can share how you're doing that, and if there's interest there for your manager or the CEO, whoever that is, then that can really like change a culture.
Do your kids play any sport?
They do. Yes, my husband's basketball player. He coaches them in basketball. I coach volleyball.
Wow.
So
It's a sports
you don't
family.
care what sport they play, but they have to play sports.
That's great. That's great.
There's a great stat. I forget, I don't know the exact stat, but there's a great stat that like the majority of female business leaders, I think, were
Yeah.
athletes of some sort. And I think just that confidence and that sense of growth mindset and putting yourself out there and taking risks and working within a team, I think are some really invaluable lessons for everyone, but also really for girls.
Absolutely. And I love your point of the feedback loop within sports.
Yeah.
And I think within investing, the feedback loop is so long.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, like even if your company raises a small follow-on round, you just tend to feel like, oh my God, you're the best investor. Without really knowing where the company would go in a few years from now. But it's actually pretty cool to sort of balance your investing life with some of sports or maybe something else
Yeah.
to sort of be in that feedback loop. Well, my mom reminds me every day that I'm stupid. So that's a great feedback loop. Oh God.
Shift that to, you've a new area you can develop in here.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's always something to learn. That's
Absolutely.
my like early career advice too. Is like, don't think about climbing a like linear ladder. Think about how fast you can learn different areas, because the more senior you get, the more skills you're going to need to pull from to do that. And it's great in your early career to have that breadth of experience, and also helps you hone like your real strengths and what you love.
And also helps you eliminate the things that you don't like.
Totally.
I mean, later in life, you don't want to be doing something that you didn't want to do earlier. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Who would you like to recommend as the next guest for Women Build?
Oh, there's so many wonderful people. I recently came across a woman who is leading a company called MIDI, Joanna Strober, who's amazing. I don't know her super well, but I'm very impressed with her. A career mentor of mine is a woman named Rebecca Van Dyke, and she was the CMO of Levi's and led consumer marketing at Facebook, and is really incredible, and is kind of a portfolio life now. Those are a couple.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I had a lovely time chatting with you, and I have to tell you that I love your laugh. It just makes the conversation very joyful and interesting. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.